Welcome to the Actuarial Development Institute podcast. My name is Charles Johnson from the Actuarial Development Institute, and today I'm rocking my Coaching Actuaries t-shirt because we have the man, the legend, the other Coach K, Dave Kester here.
Welcome, everybody. It's good to be here. And yes, I'm Dave, founder of Coaching Actuaries, and that's my day job. And then my side projects, my give back projects, is founder of Intersecting Us. And I get the opportunity to wear the ADI t-shirt today as a proud supporter of ADI.
I love it. I love it. I think everyone in the actuarial world knows you and has seen you a million times talk about all the things they care about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm hoping today we can learn about Dave and Dave's journey.
Sure.
We're going to start like so incredibly far back. When was the first time in your life where you were math, like you realized the importance in math to you?
Well, I've always enjoyed math, and I realized that math was my best subject. And it wasn't really a close call because most of my other subjects were pretty average at best. And I always liked math. So it was natural for me to know that math was my thing. And both my parents were teachers, and it just seemed very natural that I wanted to teach math. And so I never really can remember a time where I didn't really think I knew what I wasn't going to do. Once I realized I wasn't going to become a professional baseball player and a professional basketball player and a professional football player, which was my original goal. But those soon went in the background, and so math teaching was always my thing.
Yeah. What was your first memory when you were younger where like you solved a math problem or you encountered something in mathematics that like you're like, oh, this is it excited you deeply?
I think I just always enjoyed puzzles, but when I got to calculus, that was just so much fun because it was a different type of math than I had seen before. And it was not something that I expected. Where, algebra, geometry, those seemed very intuitive to me because, you're working with something you can see, shapes, or just an unknown. Once you get over the unknown part of algebra, it was pretty intuitive. But then calculus, you get into limits and you get into really practical stuff and math in motion. That was just really cool. So I think just once I started working with calculus, where you can like derive formulas on the fly for things that you were given before, like what is the formula for the volume of a sphere, and you take like a circle and you revolve it around the x-axis and you integrate it and you just like build that from scratch, and you could do that. That was just really cool. You kind of feel like I'm discovering math all over again.
So it's part of what's like fun for you in math, this ability to discover and create.
Mm-hmm.
Like math is this path forward that you can create new things.
Correct. Yeah, it's the more I get into it, the more I appreciate the creativity. And I really see that math is so much more about that creative side than it is about trying to find the right answer. And the interesting math is more about asking the good questions than it is about finding the right answer.
Mm. So you said when you were younger, you always knew you wanted to be a math teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you went to school for, right?
Correct. I got my degree at University of Northern Iowa in math education, and I was pumped up to become a math teacher.
And did either of your parents teach math?
No. My dad was a high school business teacher, and my mom worked with, I would say, students that needed a Head Start. It was a Head Start program. They were younger. They were disadvantaged, and she had a wonderful heart. And so that I've always benefited from my mom's hearty side of helping people in need. And so that's a great heritage that I feel like my mom has passed on to me.
Mm. So when you decided you were going to go to school for the family business, your parents were pretty pleased.
Yeah, I think so. It wasn't like they were pushing me to become a math teacher. But now in retrospect, I think that they may have saw some things in me that was wondering if maybe a math teacher wasn't the best option for me, it seemed like very obvious because I loved to teach. I loved the school environment. I loved math, and I was pretty good with math grades. And so it seemed like a slam dunk that math teaching was going to be my thing.
Okay, so Dave, the child of two teachers, great at math, gets his math degree. You're good. Like your life's set. Like
It is.
and it's over, and you retire after 40 years
I
of being
had
a
my
teacher.
whole life planned, just get the job as a school, and I was going to be very happy being a high school math teacher.
And then all of a sudden, your life changed.
It did.
And how did it come about? And how did you feel when that happened? Like, I imagine that there's probably some uncertainty there about whether you're doing the right thing, because it seems like, since you were a kid, you were this is my path, this is my journey.
Yeah, it was a pretty traumatic experience, actually. It was one of those life-changing moments where you're just thrown a curveball, because I did not get one offer as a math teacher. And as I look back, there's various reasons for it. Like, one, ironically, I didn't have the necessary computer background skills. And I say ironically because later that became my forte, in consulting was my computer program skills. But at that time, I didn't have it. I didn't have like a coaching certificate, which is kind of ironic too, because I really wanted to coach. And I love that, but I just had never gotten my coaching certificate.
Yeah.
Or they want, so there was things that they wanted that I didn't have in addition to teaching. But there was also, I don't know if they ever told me this, but you can read between the lines. Like, I don't think I interviewed real well. And even though I feel like I knew good answers, I remember one particular case that had me teach something, and I get excited about calculus, the advanced levels, and they had me explain a problem that was like adding like fractions or something that I hadn't even thought about in years. Like, how do you explain this? And they had me do that on the fly. So, I gave them an answer that I thought, well, this makes sense to me. And then I can remember the superintendent kind of scratching his head and looking at the principal, and he said, did you get anything out of that? and he said, oh, yeah, I did. But I'm thinking, I'm not sure if that was a good explanation. So I think that there was some of that part of it. And bottom line, I had to come to the realization that teaching is a unique gift and a unique skill. And some people are really gifted at it. And, I know people who are that. And I realized that I wasn't really gifted as a teacher. And I don't put a lot of emphasis on like giftedness, but I realized that there was a difference in how they could communicate concepts clearly than I can. And this live podcast may give illustrations to that, in that it's difficult to be in front of a live audience and communicate. And, some people are really good at it and they make it look easy. But for many people, it's not. And I've had to learn that skill over time. And so it is something you can learn. But I think at that ripe old age of 22, when you think you're smarter than maybe you are, and you think that, okay, I can watch a teacher teach and it kind of looks easy, generally it's not. And so I think there were some rough edges there that needed to be smoothed out a little bit.
So we got...
So it was a tough lesson for me. It really was.
So here's rough edge Dave. He thinks he's all that. He's humbled quickly in this process of pursuing his dream. And someone says, well, you're not good enough to be a teacher, so I guess you'll just have to try this other math field of being an actuary.
Well, no one said that. I was engaged at the time and felt responsible, like I need to get a job. And so I was doing whatever I could to get a teaching job, and nothing panned out. So I saw a job opening in Des Moines, which is an hour away from where I lived, for an insurance company at an actuarial position. And I thought, well, I guess I can interview there. It's not going to hurt. And I just need to try something. So I went and interviewed there. And I'm used to an educational place. And going into this big, massive insurance company the artwork they had in that building was more money than I even hundreds of thousands of dollars just in the artwork. And it was intimidating because everyone wore a suit and tie and very formal, very upscale. And I felt it kind of stuffy, actually. And they asked me questions. And I knew nothing about insurance because I had no background in insurance. And so they were asking me things. And I think I knew what a premium was. And I think that was about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stumbled over the interview compared to my math interviews where I felt like I could jump right in. And so it just went awful. So I thought, well, at least I'm not going to get this job because I don't want this job.
Yeah.
And
I don't know anything about it. I clearly interview poorly.
Yeah.
I'm in a place where I don't fit in. So
a fish out of water.
I'm definitely not going to get a job offer here.
Job.
The lifelong dream I've been preparing for. That's I got to go back to that. But
and then maybe I'll give the ending of that story real quick. In that I realized that I found out they offered me the job, of course.
Yeah.
And I was really shocked by it, of course. And I also didn't like that idea because then I had a decision to make.
Mm-hmm.
Do I take it or not? And I had one more interview for a teaching position. And of all the places I interviewed, this was like the best because they were going to bring me right in at the senior level, like teaching calculus was my main thing to do.
Yeah.
And I thought this was great. So I had an interview, and the interview went wonderful. I connected with the people I was interviewing, and everything seemed to go great. And I felt like, okay, I'm going to get this job. I thought, but if I don't, I kind of feel like I'm obligated to take the actuarial position.
Yeah.
And they called me up, and I can still remember the phone call. And the principal said that, well, we really loved having you there, and I would hire you in a heartbeat if this was my decision. But the superintendent feels obligated to this other lady that interviewed because she was instrumental in getting a bond issue passed.
Mm.
And so it was really kind of politics that forced that decision. And you could just hear in her voice how disappointed she was that she couldn't offer it to me. And I'm thinking, you have no idea how hard this is for me to hear because this is not just me not getting this job. This is me now going on a different path. And so, it was another thing that was, it wasn't like forced on me, but as I look back, it was an opportunity for me to go to a path that I felt very uncomfortable with. But, in the end, it turned out really good.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a good lesson for me to not let comfort always dictate the correct path to go on. And you knock on doors, you try things, you do your best, but sometimes opportunity opens in places you don't expect, and you have to put aside fear and you jump in.
Mm. We talked about this on one of the book clubs about like chaotic moments,
Mm-hmm.
Butterfly effect moments. Mm-hmm. I remember interviewing for my first actuarial internship, and it was going to be during the school year. And I had another job offer to go work at a leadership academy because I just, happenstance to apply this job with a link at the bottom of an email. And I remember getting the phone call saying that they weren't going to give me the offer. And I guess I felt a sense of relief because I got to do something wildly different than I was expecting, and it excited me.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience, it just changed my whole perspective on work and life and what I wanted to do. And, just like you, I had spent so much time training and learning math. And so I went to this leadership academy. It's in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. And they fly in these people to speak. And I do the most actuarial thing ever. I collect the feedback, I aggregate the data, and then I produce a report. Like, that's my job.
Sure.
And I just in looking at this data and watching people speak, I realized that that, not just I can do math, but if I can communicate it with people, if I can explain things in a way that motivates and educates people, that skill set is just as powerful. So here you are. Here's Dave, right? Walking away from the math field. Dave, you've struggled. Dave
Right.
Kester has struggled at something in his life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But you go to the actuarial field.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to make one other point. So you talked about how stuffy insurance is,
Uh-huh.
right? And I think it's this very kind of universal experience that people have, because when you go to a lot of like cities or towns, the biggest buildings there are like banks and insurance companies. And there's this perception around, okay, well, it's this big building and I see the people that are dressed in suits that walk in. And I remember this program we ran at State Farm where we would take like youth in the community that had challenged backgrounds in high school, and we would bring them in to intern. And one of the first things that all the students say every single year we ran the program was, I couldn't believe how nice everyone was. And it changed my view that like, okay, well, there's the people who are better than everyone else. To like, no, those are people just like me. And not only are they like me, but I would be so happy to have a job like them, to work in a place like that. So you get a job in insurance. How was it different than you expected?
Well, first of all, I will share why I didn't want to become an actuary. I didn't hear about becoming an actuary until I was my sophomore year in college. So they didn't do a good job of promoting actuarial science careers back in the...
Be an actuary.
Back in the mid-'80s. And so I remember I first got exposed to it my sophomore year. Our math team got to go to an insurance company about 30 miles away, and we got the chance to see what it was like at an insurance company. And they were explaining what it was like to be an actuary. And there they had these booklets of the Part 1 and Part 2 exams created by the SOA. And that's what the exams were back then. And so that was probability and statistics and calculus. Calculus was Part 1. And so I leafed through that booklet and looking at it, kind of excited about, let's just take a look at this stuff because I like this stuff. And this could be very interesting. And as I was going through it, I was just immediately aware how much I did not want to become an actuary because those problems were way more difficult than what I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is not something that I could do. So then I just kind of like dismissed that idea of being an actuary because the exams were going to be too difficult. And so then I never thought about being an actuary again. And so then when I think about it later, I start looking into the idea of like, what are these exams really? And all I read about is, terrifying stories about how hard they are. So I consider myself a good person in math in like education, but I had no idea what math meant in the business world. And I had this idea, and it was not a very accurate idea, that for some reason that the math they used was like way beyond what I was capable of doing. Because they're getting paid a lot more than insurance teachers. So therefore the math had to be harder. It was like my logic. And so I was intimidated by it, and I didn't think I could pass the test. And I remember I took my first test.
All right. So
and
this is great. So Dave Kester, the math's too hard.
Math's
right?
too hard. Yeah.
It's way outside your reach, but you're sitting for your first exam. Walk me through this exam process.
Well, I studied.
How did you feel on your first day when you went to sit for it?
Oh, yeah, just overwhelmed, unprepared, even though I studied a ton. But I'm studying on my own. I don't have any coaching actuaries resources or, I have my old calculus textbook. That's what I was studying from. And I even skipped over a little bit of the linear algebra. I never really knew what an eigenvalue was. That was on the exam, and I thought, oh man, I'm not going to pass it because I skipped that part. It's over my head. But I took the test, and I didn't think I did that good. But I remember feeling like I can do this, though. I mean, I can pass this test, so I will pass the next time I take it. So I kind of thought I'm going to fail it, but for some reason I felt like I had some confidence that I've done it, got my feet wet, gone through the exam, and I feel like the next time I can be better prepared for it because now I kind of see the questions that are there, and it felt doable. And so this was back in the days when you get your exam results on paper 2 months later. And so I learned that you're supposed to get anxious during that time because I was hanging out with other actuaries and they were all getting nervous. It's like, what are you getting nervous about? Well, exam results are coming. It's like, okay. I was nervous taking the exam. I'm not like nervous now, but I guess I'm supposed to be. And they pass them out, and it always comes out on Friday. And you get the envelopes, and everyone just kind of like gets all uptight. And so I grab my envelope, going to open it, and they say, don't you want to go into that room over there? I said, why is that? So you can have some privacy. And I'm thinking, why do I need privacy to open up the envelope? And like, okay, I'll go in there because I'm just a little naive about all this process of how stressful this is supposed to be. So I go in there and close the door and open the envelope, and I saw it pass. And so it's like, wow, I was just, so excited and beyond excited. I was surprised and just like, wow, I couldn't believe it. And that was like the ultimate moment that, okay, I passed one, I can pass the next one. Mm-hmm. And I remember that my colleagues all thought, even though they didn't tell me directly, they thought I wasn't going to pass it because they kept telling me how hard it was. Don't worry about it. We all fail. They gave me those speeches. And then when I told them I passed, I could see the shock on their faces because they were all Drake graduates. They went through the Drake program. Yeah. And they were smart people, well-trained, and they knew I was just this really kind of naive guy who didn't know what was going on in the actuarial world. And they kept telling me, well, if you don't like taking exams, you can do something else. And they tried to get me to do other things besides an actuary. They said, you can work in the programming area. You can do this. You don't have to take exams. But I wanted to use my math because I thought, well, if I do all these other things, all the things I learned about math was going to be wasted. And I wanted to use my math. So that was my main motivation to stick with it was I didn't want to just like not use my math. So anyway, I passed it, and it was a shock to me and a bigger shock to my colleagues.
Yeah. So you passed your first exam, and you kept taking exams. Mm-hmm. Did they get harder? How did you like being an actuary, actually?
So now I think I figured out why I got the job, because it was like it had the word actuary in it, but it was somewhat of a glorified secretarial position because whenever the mail came, I had to go get the mail. Whenever they needed supplies to be refilled, I refilled the supplies. Whenever the phone rang, I had to answer the phone. And so that was back in the days where, they had you answer the phone and then you pass it on to someone else.
Yeah.
So I did get to do actuarial work. I got to learn programming. I got to calculate premium rates. So I got to do a lot of that work. But they had me do all this secretarial stuff. And then I look back at my salary, and it was actually less than what my wife was making as a teacher. And so you get the idea that I may have been the only one that really interviewed for that job.
Yeah.
Is what I'm thinking, because no other qualified actuary would have gotten a job that was probably paid that low, doing that kind of work. And so I didn't really look into those details. I was just looking for a job.
Yeah.
And so it was good.
Something changed, right?
Yeah.
So you did the grunt work,
right? I did the grunt work, and then I realized
it's funny now. When companies come and talk, they talk about how much value their interns have. Right. We won't make you get. And your experience was the opposite. You were the coffee boy.
I was right, but that was okay because I grew up very. My parents were very humble and worked hard. They grew up on a farm. Mm-hmm. And there was never work that was above you. You always just, you cleaned up and so there was never this idea that a job was too low for you. And so I was just happy to do it all. And once I get motivated to be on a team. And so what I got the opportunity was kind of like what you alluded to, is like that realization that this insurance company, although it appears stuffy and it has a different culture to it, I got to know the people, and the people were wonderful. In fact, they were very caring and kind of mentoring me in my very beginning stages. And I was expecting kind of the opposite, that I would be looked down upon because I was so uneducated that I was more of a hindrance to the team. And in fact, I think that it was kind of the opposite. They looked at me as like an opportunity for someone that can grow and learn. And they gave me time to learn how to program. They would answer all my questions. And so, I really was pleasantly surprised that working at an insurance company was cool. And I was able to be part of a team that was they were really smart people, and I learned a lot. I still remember their meetings that they had every Monday morning, and I was surprised because the meetings were about people asking questions to like their boss. And it was not about, let's see how much work we can get done this week. It was asking questions that were thought-provoking questions that were challenging to make sure we were going down the right path. And that was like, wow, this is really great. This is what an actuaries do. They just don't just crank numbers. They strategize. They ask hard questions. They work together as a team. And so all those things was right up my alley. So I fell in love with that right away.
It's interesting you describe the love of your work like that, because when you were talking about why you loved calculus, it was your ability to discover and explore, right? By deriving and figuring things out. And I feel like you probably wouldn't have gotten to do that as a math teacher, but as an actuary, we do that all the time.
Right. Exactly.
And so here's once again, Dave, career path. Want to become an actuary now. You're passing your exams. You're doing well at work. And we're done. You retire as an actuary and it's over. But no, it changes again. And so at what point, you're working at your first job at an insurance company, did you realize like, okay, I've gotten to a place where I'm not as satisfied and I want to try something different? Can you walk me through that?
Sure. First of all, I only stayed at that company for about a year and a half because even though I was able to get to do some interesting things, the math was basically multiplication and division. And I learned actuarial terms about how to calculate premium rates, but in the end, it was just a bunch of multiplication. And so that didn't excite my math brain as much. But I saw other people that were working there that were getting into the theory, the life contingencies, the probabilities. And so that's what I wanted to get into, and that opportunity wasn't there for me. And an opportunity opened up just 2 blocks down the street in Des Moines at a life insurance company. And I interviewed there, and that culture was totally different. It was very laid back. I don't even know if they had a painting on the wall. It was kind of ugly, actually. But it was a very laid back company. You don't have to, wear your stuffy clothes, and it seemed more like a family. And so that fit my culture better. And so I had an opportunity to get into the math I liked. And so I went down that path. And that was where I realized, okay, this is where I could stay the rest of my life. I'm happy with this company. I'm happy with the people here. And this is my dream job. And so I'm sure I would have stayed at that company if the company didn't change. But it did.
Yeah.
And they went from a mutual company, and you're from Northwestern.
Yeah, I worked for and State Farm.
State Farm.
Both
So,
mutual insurance. Yes.
And then they became a stock company. They demutualized. They were on the cutting edge of all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they made sure to tell us about how cutting edge it was. And I was okay for change. I'm okay with change. And a lot of my colleagues struggled with that. And the change was fine. But then I realized that I was okay with different buildings, different job titles, all that. But the culture changed to very much focus on short-term profits. It wasn't so much about getting your work done as it was sometimes about how things appeared. And you know what I'm saying. And,
yeah.
And
the politics of a high school math teacher has followed you to the business world.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden my eyes was open to, and I was okay with that to some extent, but success found me in that I now achieved my FSA and I was getting promoted, and they wanted me to now run meetings. And so I was getting involved with the leadership of the company, going to leadership meetings, and you would have loved it, I'm sure. I was shocked at it, and I was supposed to run meetings, and I found out that was something I wasn't good at, and nor was I not motivated. And I think there's a lesson there. Usually those two things go hand in hand. And I could have learned how to do that, but I had no motivation to do it. I really wanted to stay using my technical skills. And there wasn't an opportunity for me at that company because they wanted me to delegate all those technical projects to my staff. And so work all of a sudden became not fun. It became work. And I just didn't want to go through life just getting by.
Mm-hmm. How long were you like that in that minute? Like how long did
about
that
a
last?
year.
Okay.
And
So you realized a year's not too long. You realized pretty fast that you wanted to do something different.
And a friend of mine, Brian, that's when we started dreaming. And we decided to create an actuarial study program called StudySoft. It's not quite as famous as coaching actuaries. If you've heard of it, you are one in a million.
Yeah.
But
so something inside of you still wanted to teach.
It did, right?
Yeah.
Because when I was going through the exam process, I would study for a little bit, and then I'd start thinking about, well, how could I do this better? You know, there's this part of me that always wants to improve efficiency. You know, the education part of me wanted to teach it. And so I had a hard time focusing at times because I was thinking more about how to package this up and making it better for the next person.
Okay, so you and Brian are pontificating.
We are, and he's probably even less satisfied with his job than I am. And so he was really open to the idea. So first we decided to create this program, and he was a better programmer than me. So he kind of wrote the program, and then I did the educational content. It was for upper level exams. And we asked our boss, is this okay for us to do on the side? And she said, sure. So we called a guy named Harold Cherry. I don't know if you know Harold Cherry, but anyway, he was the founder of ASM, Actual Study Materials.
Okay.
And asked him, hey, we've got this study program. Would you be interested in selling it? Back then, of course, it was all on paper. They would give out brochures. Would you be able to put it on your marketing papers? We weren't expecting him to say yes, but he did, and he took a chance on us, and that was pretty cool. So, all of a sudden we created this program. We put it on floppy disk, and then we distributed, and so we were in business. And so we got our feet wet selling an actuarial study program that you had to install from a floppy disk.
Mm-hmm. Wild success.
You
were tired. We
sold at least 10 copies.
So this is your first entrepreneurial pursuit.
Yes, right. That I would say that of real significance.
Yeah, and so it goes, as well as your first venture often goes, know. But you and Brian realize that you like the entrepreneurial side. You're both dissatisfied with your jobs. Mm-hmm. At what point do you decide to leave and pursue something on your own?
Well, it was kind of interesting because, we put together brochures and marketed it in addition to the marketing that ASM did. And there was a local consulting company, a single man who had the consulting company, and he was looking for help. And he contacted Brian and I to see if we would want to join his consulting company. And we showed him what we had done with our StudySoft program and the marketing. And I think that really helped get that job because he saw we were willing to take an idea and we got it to market. Mm-hmm. And he didn't necessarily know how good it was, but as a consultant, getting things to market is a good skill to have, and not every actuary has that.
Yeah. And
so I remember him looking over it, and he didn't have high standards like how the marketing thing looked. I look back on it, and there was no design to it or anything like that. But that didn't really matter. The fact was that we followed through, and we got a product, and we delivered it. And so he hired us both, and the idea was we could continue doing our StudySoft business on the side while we did actual consulting for him. And it worked out good because he was a small company. We worked from home, and it gave us a lot of flexibility to build our products as we worked and got paid to do actual consulting work.
Wow. So you were working from home way before
COVID. It was wonderful working in my basement. I was in like my dream because now, I had my computer, had my technology, I had my software, my programming, I had Brian, and then I had a mentor, and we actually used Tillinghast software. So he had licenses for that, and I got to learn the task software, which was wonderful. So, it was a dream opportunity for me to really learn and explore.
At what point did you and Brian decide you wanted to start building your own software?
Right. Build our own software.
Our own actuarial programming?
So like when did we decide to start our own company, like apart from, or because we'd already like developed the software?
Not for coaching actuaries.
Oh, no, not for coaching actuaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I remember correctly,
Okay.
at one point in time, you were building reserve calculations?
Yes.
Or a calculation engine that you were trying to sell to companies.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Was this part of the consulting firm?
That was, no, that was after we left the consulting firm and we started off on our own.
Okay. What gave you the confidence to leave the consulting firm?
Yeah, we were really confident in our abilities. No, we weren't. His business didn't turn out the way he planned it, and so he took away our salary and we went 100% commission. And so we thought, well, if we're going to be taking all the risk, we might as well do it with our own company rather than working for someone else.
Yeah.
And so we didn't necessarily have all of the courage to do it on our own. Say, let's keep our salary and get rid of that. No, the salary was taken away. So again, it was a lesson of a very difficult situation because we remembered how difficult that news was, and it was a hardship, but it turned out into an opportunity. It forced us to take that last leap to say, okay, now we're completely on our own, and we're going to sink or swim based on our own efforts.
Mm-hmm. And how did it go?
We were creative. We were fortunate. Des Moines is a great city for actual consulting. Opportunities came up at just the right time. And so even though we started with no clients at all, the educational part didn't pan out, but the consulting did. And so we were able to make ends meet, but we took any job we could get. So we programmed for back in the days when cell phones were first coming out. They were building all these towers and stuff, and they needed someone to build access databases to manage all the information, to manage this high technology of a cell phone, and so we did consulting work for them building databases, even though it had nothing to do with actual science. It was a consulting opportunity that paid the bills.
Yeah.
So we took several jobs like that were maybe a third of the rate of what we were going to get as an actuary, but it still was good enough to pay our bills. And we learned as we did those projects. We got better at programming. We got better at building databases. And that was the thing that I really learned as I was doing all these projects. I was learning by doing. Mm-hmm. And you can only learn so much by reading like a manual. And I learned by building things. And so it went surprisingly well. It lasted for about 3 years until Brian left the company to pursue other things that he was thinking about doing. So, mm-hmm. So then I was completely on my own.
Okay. So Dave, successful consultant, failed.
Success, that's small s.
Small s. Small,
yeah,
so,
very small s.
Yeah. I think to go independent and get any work and to do it successfully is impressive.
Yeah.
And brave.
Yeah.
Even if it's forced upon you.
I was forced, and I was totally shocked because I don't have marketing skills. I don't have skills as far as I've never done this, and so none of that is my skill set. And to think that we were able to find work, the people that were paying us money, surprised me. It really did.
Yeah.
So again, we were fortunate. A lot of things kind of went our way.
Yeah. So the cell phone network is being built.
Yes.
You're building databases for it. You're learning these technical skills, this back end stuff. You're teaching companies kind of, off to the side, and then all of a sudden, this thing called the internet happens.
Right.
And when was the light bulb moment for you that like, okay, maybe I should try this teaching actuarial content again?
Yeah. So the story we were talking about was mid 1950s, or 1990s. Excuse me. Not that old.
The
Scratch,
mid 1950s.
And so now we're jumping forward to 2008.
Well, so what happened between that? That's a long time.
Yeah, it was. And that's where we had all kinds of consulting projects. And what I learned there, a lesson where my eyes were open, is that fear causes change. And many people are fear-based. And there's all kinds of things that can make people nervous. And so right at the big thing at that time, for those old enough to remember, was Y2K.
Yeah.
And, I was a little bit, I was thinking, I just don't see this as a big deal. But smarter people than me do think it's a big deal. And so I'll just go on the assumption this is a big deal. And it potentially was. And there was instances where it was. But at that time, everyone needed to change their coding to add those 2 digits.
Yeah.
And it sounds very simple, but most of the times it was very complicated because it infiltrated their entire system.
Yeah.
And so I was realizing that I was getting calls right and left, and I could name my price for what I wanted to get paid.
Yeah.
And of course, I was still too shy about I could have doubled it and I probably increased it by 10%.
Yeah.
And so missed opportunity, but I was still working like 60, 70, 80 hours and getting paid by the hour. So it was like my first time where I was making money.
Yeah.
And I realized I was making money because other people were afraid. There was fear. And I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting that there's opportunity. And so I think that gave me a new perspective on dealing with difficulties, is that you can face difficulties and try to be afraid of it, or you can look for silver linings in it. And so I try to take a look at things that may have been bad and look for the silver lining in it. And so Y2K ended up being a great thing. And then we had the 911 thing. And that was, of course, awful. But it caused opportunities for people to be able to they needed help to navigate those situations. And then the next big one was in 2008 with the financial crisis. And you've got Sarbanes-Oxley came about because of the fraud that occurred. And so all of a sudden there's this fear that, okay, how can we trust the numbers?
Mm-hmm.
And that opened up opportunity for our company because now companies needed help into making sure not only the numbers are right, but how can they prove they're right?
Yeah. And
they don't have time to build all that infrastructure. And they've got the idea that, well, consultants must know this. You know how consultants are. You try to become an expert. You have to be careful about choosing what you're an expert in, but some of the times you're learning as you go.
Yeah.
And that was the time where I was learning as I was going. But it opened up 5 years of work for me, just solving that one problem. One client after another needed help, taking their actuarial processes, taking their spreadsheets, and provide some structure, some security, so that they know that the numbers coming out of those spreadsheets were accurate.
Yeah. So now you're really successful. You have a domain of expertise, especially as a consultant.
Yeah.
Compliance on emerging regulation is a huge business.
It is.
And so, you're doing really well. You're working a lot and making a lot of money.
Right.
Why go back to teaching actuarial mathematics for exams?
I know. It was a difficult decision because I was now in what I thought was my sweet spot, which was programming.
Yeah.
And taking like spreadsheets and re-engineering them into a database by programming them. And it was something that I feel like I had my skill set. I learned it, and people needed it. They're paying money for it, and it was fun. And I started to develop a team of people to help me with it. So by then I had maybe half a dozen people working with me. Some of them were actuaries and some of them were programmers. So it was, it was profitable enough where I was starting to feel like, okay, I'm not worrying about next month, next quarter, and maybe even not, I kind of felt like maybe even 6 months from now, I kind of had that long of a comfort level that, okay, work is there that I don't need to worry about it for the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a new feeling for me, because up until then it was like every month you're trying to just get through that month. And so the educational part was, it failed, the study soft. So then that was version 1. Around 2002, I started version 2, Conquer, because I thought I'd figured out all the things I'd missed on version 1 and I fixed it in version 2. But
what were those? What did you change?
I improved the quality control of everything, the program, but mainly the content.
Yeah.
I realized the content wasn't as good as it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got experts in the field to help me with the content. And I got into a subject that was my better fit than what I started with, and which was the, actual mathematics, interest theory, things like that. And so
you started fellowship and you went back to the preliminary.
The associateship, right?
Yeah.
I did fellowship at first because that's what the last thing I did. I got my FSA. It was fresh in my mind. And so I had my notes and they were still on the syllabus. So I kind of like converted my study notes to the content. Yeah. So it was a natural thing to do. But then when that didn't work and I tried it again, I realized I really like the math of actual mathematics. And I like multiple choice problems where you can program a system to take tests and they're very, yes or no, black or white, it's right or it's wrong. And so that was my new idea. Came up with a new brand, called it Conquer. And it was better. You could say it was 3 times better. You go from 12 to 36 sales. So 3 times sounds great, but 3 times a small number is still a small number.
Yeah.
So tried that for about 4 or 5 years. And then the SOA changed the syllabus again. And so we would have had to redo all of our content. And this was around like 2006 when I was super busy in my consultant.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm getting paid top dollar to do actual consulting work. Why would I want to go in and redesign the content and sell another 50 copies?
Yeah.
And so I decided I just need to drop that and call it another failed attempt. Not failed, but a learning process. And let's just focus in on the actual consulting.
Yeah. It's interesting because to try your hand again at something so many years apart over and over again, I think that's not typical.
Right.
I think a lot of people, especially if they fail at something once, they'll maybe try again immediately. But rarely do they continue to come back to something like that. Was it just like your love of math and teaching?
It is.
Like now it seems so obvious. Like obviously Dave should be doing this. Like it is,
but it was not obvious at all. It seemed like a bad decision. And
what does your wife think when you're like, you know what, I'm going to try this a third time?
She's a smart cookie.
Yeah,
she is. I mentioned I was having trouble getting teaching jobs. She was a teacher also.
Yeah.
And she got a teaching job everywhere she interviewed, but she was only going to accept it if it was in a place where I was at. So she was putting my career first. So she's a sharp woman, and I'm trying to remember what she was thinking at that time. Through this whole process, she has been amazingly supportive, which is a little bit surprising if you know her, because her personality is she grew up on a farm. Life was routine, and she loved that routine. And she liked the idea of a teacher because it's predictable. And so risk adverse, she is, I would say very risk adverse. And so me starting off, and I was the only breadwinner of the family. We had 4 kids. And so she was home with the kids. It was a crazy idea and extremely risk adverse. But she never questioned my decision to do that. I was kind of surprised because I was even like, this is a little bit off the charts, risky. And to think that she was going to be okay with it really surprised me. But she was. She didn't trust my plan, but she trusted me. And so I did. By now, she's seen things work. She's seen the consulting work, and she was involved really with the culture of the company because we're still working in the basement. My main employee.
Hold on. You're running a consulting firm. You have 6 people working for you
in the basement.
And the office is still your basement.
Yeah, and it's smaller than this room. It's about half the size of this room. So we were packed like sardines.
Every morning, your wife's getting up, taking care of the kids. You homeschool your kids too. So the kids are home.
Homeschool.
And walking through the front door are Dave's employees. Wow.
Except for one of them.
Okay.
One of them named Ganesh, he lived with us in our basement. So he walked from the bedroom in the basement to right here. And so we had not only had all these people coming, I didn't realize at the time, but our neighbors had to be extremely sympathetic because we were parking cars all over our neighborhood. They would try to park in our driveway, but then they'd park in front of their houses, and our neighbors never complained. But it was unbelievable how packed it was in there. And I didn't care because I was living the dream, but it was like around 2008. And so let me talk about Ganesh real quick because there's a special story. He's from India. He was my first employee. He lived with us. And so not only is he living with us and my wife accommodating him, but he taught us the fine art of Indian cuisine. And so chicken curry, all those things. And my wife just loved learning about it. She loves cooking. And so we went through this period where she would create this like unbelievable lunch for us of Indian cuisine, the whole works, curries and everything. I remember how full I was when I get done. Like, I want to take a nap.
Yeah.
But like, how did she do that while she was homeschooling and doing all the household things that I wasn't doing? And cooking. And so, that's one of her skill sets is just to multitask and get all those things done. So her focus isn't so much on like, well, Dave, are you going to go into this educational thing? She trusted me with it, but she was more in tune to like, well, how can we help Ganesh experience more of the American culture? How can I learn more about the Indian culture from Ganesh? And so the people, she was involved with the people.
Yeah.
And the business part of it, she just kind of trusted me, and she was happy that our bills were being paid, and that was enough for her.
Yeah, it's funny when you were talking about like going and working at your first insurance company versus your second one, and going from a stuffy to a more laid back, and the importance of culture. Your wife was the culture of your company. Right. Ganesh was, like
culture, right. It really was, and that's why we became like they call us the salties. We became, like a culture of. Very diverse. Is that
the origin of Salt Solutions, the Salties?
Salt Solution came first, but people then, as we were consulting, our clients started calling us, like in the emails, hey, Salties. And so then it kind of stuck. But we were the salts of the earth was kind of like the idea, and spices. And of course, Ganesh being from India, they're known for their spices.
Yeah.
And so it really had a great story to it. But back to the idea of like what it would have been very obvious that we should have gotten out of the office, but I was not thinking along those lines.
Yeah.
But finally, my wife said, Dave, I think your business has grown enough that you guys should get your own office.
How kind.
And so, I didn't think very long about it, and I didn't like the idea of adding more expense because this was a big expense for me. but I figured that she's right. And so it was a very easy decision. And that's what got us out of the basement. And then that was about the time when coaching actuaries was going to start, was we got out of the basement. I had a programmer at that time that had just been in the basement, but for not for long, but he was like one more person in our basement. And I think that that was the last person that my wife said, it's just too much in one room. And so now we had our own space, and it allowed me then to hire more people to build coaching actuaries.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you talk about your wife and your wife's belief in you. I'm buying a house right now.
Right. And those stories,
and I'm changing my whole life. And there's points where, I sit down with my wife and I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know how I'm going to make X, Y, Z work. And, she'll just look at me and she goes, you always figure it out.
Right.
And I was like you just believe that I don't know if I'm going to figure it out. You just believe I'm going to do it. And she just said, I've seen you,
Right. And that's priceless.
Yeah. And, you have, there's something about someone who really believes in you that changes, what you believe about yourself.
Right. Yeah. And so you talk about persistency. You don't want to quit when you have that kind of confidence. And I think you asked a question like, what made me get back into it the third time?
Yeah.
And so now you have the context of what was going on. And now we move into a new place. And in the back of my mind, I realized the best actual educational thing to do would to put it into the web, on the internet. Because then we had to fix our content in our program all the time. And in doing so, you'd have to send out new floppy disks.
Yeah.
Big pain.
Yeah.
But I thought, hey, if you put it on the internet, you just fix it and it's done. And I thought that would be so amazing to do that. And now I had a programmer that could program on the web because I didn't know how to program on the web. So I couldn't do it, but I had someone that could do it. And I was approached by a professor from Northwestern College that, had the idea of Adapt. And so I had a new office, new space, new programmer. And, you can always make time for a new idea. And so that the combination of all those things wanted me to give this one more go at education. And so that's what allowed us to start. And we still called it, we called the company Adapt, was the name of it. And if you wanted to use Adapt, you would go to saltsolutions.com/adapt.
Yeah.
And that worked for a couple of years. And then I realized that Salt Solutions was good for consulting because it's very personal. But coaching actuaries, you need a brand recognition. And people wouldn't know what Salt Solutions was. So I thought about the name and came up with the idea of coaching actuaries. Because in my mind, I've always felt I'm kind of like a coach. My dad was a coach. I like the idea of coaching. And so I wanted to use our education to coach actuaries to become, successful actuaries. And then I thought that left room for further growth because it doesn't just say online education. There could be more to it.
Yeah.
But the principle of what I thought encapsulated everything I wanted to do was coaching actuaries.
Yeah. Okay. It's so interesting because when I first learned about coaching actuaries, it wasn't long after that, that I started using Adapt, when I was in college.
And when was this?
2012.
Okay.
2011.
Yeah. So you used Adapt.
I did. Yeah. I remember.
So you saw the Wild West.
I remember going to my internship and, talking to my fellow actuaries, and I was studying from a manual, and they said, well, if you really want to prepare for an exam, you got to use Adapt. And I was like, what is that? And they're like, oh, you log on. It's a digital portal. It gives you rankings and it makes it harder and harder progressively. And I think the experience I had and so many other people had was like, oh, like this it's so useful because it's so progressive and it's so customized. We kind of take for granted now with our phones and like scrolling that like everything we have is this customized feed. And Adapt, I think, was just way at the forefront of that idea in an educational sense. So brilliant. Okay, so you're in round 3.
Yeah.
You're already running a consulting firm.
Right.
When did it hit? Like when was that moment where you're like, oh man, did you realize that like at one point in time you would be like the everyone's gonna know Dave Kester's face?
No.
Like at what point did it click for you? Like was it the first time people started recognizing you in public? Or was it like you hit a certain sales amount?
I think the first time I realized it was when I went to an ARC conference, Actual Research Conference. Yeah. And it was at University of Connecticut.
UConn, great program. Shout out UConn. Program. Yeah. And Drake also,
Sure. And so I arrived there and just to go to the conference, and I think we had like a booth or something. And I was just surprised at how many people came up who knew me.
Yeah.
And so that was the first time I really realized that, there's a niche of people out there, even if it was a small number, that had resonated with our product and that it was successful, because that had never happened before with our first 2.
Yeah.
So I thought, wow, this must be
hold
working.
on. Are you telling me that you were never approached on the street going, hey, you built that database for the...
Well, no. Yeah, you're right. No, we did. I mean, maybe an actuary would do that, but not on the street. No. I would have to explain to my friends like what I actually did, and they still would scratch their heads. So even my friends didn't have an idea what I did.
Yeah.
But we actuaries were used to that.
Yeah, yeah. So you started getting recognized, and coaching actuaries grew. I mean,
it did.
It progressively and continuously for 10 years. What was that like, that growth process? And how is it different than, scaling your consulting firm?
Right. It was humbling because you feel like things that you may have read about of other companies, because I've been an avid investor since I guess ever since I had money to invest. So,
yeah,
when I started my career, maybe mid 90s or something. And so in the mid 90s, I really got into investing in technology companies because I was always into technology. So I, like Dell and Microsoft and Intel. And so I would read about them, and you'd read about their quarterly reports and how things are skyrocketing. And then you see the share price take off, and you think, wow, there's just like wealth just being created.
Yeah.
And it was amazing that how a company could generate so much wealth. And a lot of it's speculation, but I was benefiting that as a shareholder.
Yeah.
And so I was experiencing rapid growth as an investor, learning about these big Fortune 500 companies in the windows and I guess that growth period of Microsoft. And so now when I was experiencing growth, at an extremely small scale, but percentage-wise, it was kind of like what they were going through.
Yeah.
So I was almost feeling like I'm living that dream of what the Microsofts did in this own little bubble called actuarial science. And it allowed me to kind of take that academic understanding of what success can be like that you read about, and now I'm experiencing it. And never expected that to occur. That was never like a thought in my mind, like I'm going to try to experience the growth of Microsoft or, anything like that.
Yeah.
That was, I was just trying to help people to help them pass exams.
Yeah.
And so that was a total surprise. And every quarter it kind of like surprised me a little bit, like, wow, things moved a little bit quicker than I ever dreamed it would.
Yeah. So back when you were working at your insurance company, one of the things that, you learned that you didn't love as much was this, like going from doing the work to the people management. Mm-hmm. And as coaching actuaries grew, I'm sure you experienced that at some point in time where it was less like, okay, how do I make this the best video possible? How do I craft the best question to, okay, well, I need staff to support this.
Right.
And that what was that transition like for you, and how did you handle it?
It, like most of my career, it was not planned. It just happened.
Yeah.
And the way this happened, and the way it usually happens is when there is an opportunity to participate, is just to sign up and show up and say, okay, I'm going to do this, as opposed to saying, well, I'm just not going to do it because it doesn't seem like there's much in it for me. And so that's been a story of kind of like my development through Salt Solutions, I would try to come up with ideas, and those ideas rarely worked. But if I would come alongside and try to understand what my clients' needs were, good things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And they were always different ways it turned into success. But I just realized that just caring for people was my path to being making the company grow, which was very fun because I hated coming up with plans, and caring for people was like a fun. That's what I wanted to do to begin with.
Yeah.
And so then that was turning the corner. Like I could just be myself. I could just care for people, and I don't have to try to sell them things.
Mm.
And so now when I'm coming to coaching actuaries, I had an opportunity to teach at Drake. And
Your lifelong dream fulfilled.
exactly, yeah.
So, I've taught for the first time last year. I was curious what your experience was the first time you got up and like you're going to be a professor, your first class. What was that experience like? How did you feel? What
There
did
was
you
so
think?
much into it because at that time, coaching actuaries was just getting started, and my consulting business was going well, and I had new staff. So I didn't really have time in my schedule
Yeah.
to do this teaching thing. So there was a lot of reasons to say no. I got paid $800 for it, which of course is, in my work, it was not even a rounding number. So
Yeah.
the money was zero,
Yeah.
and it was going to take up time. And as I got into it, I found out it took a lot more time than I thought to do it well.
Yes.
And part of it was I realized I wasn't gifted at it. So if I'm going to go up in front and teach people, it wasn't just I needed to know it. I needed to figure out how to go step by step in a way that they could understand it. And then if I would forget something, how do I not get lost?
Mm-hmm.
Because I hadn't been in front of people teaching live since I was in college. It was the last time I had done this. So it was interesting, but it's like my dream. It's like, I'm excited. I'm teaching interest here. I'm at Drake. I'm at this institute that was highly respected, and I meet these professors that are highly esteemed. And now I get to go up in front of people and teach them actual mathematics. And I'm thinking about what I was like as a student. Like, I can tell them, you can do this.
Yeah.
And that's what I really wanted to tell them. It was like, you may think this is too hard. I thought this was too hard, but you can do it. And that's why I'm here. I'm not here to teach you interest theory. I'm here to tell you, you can do this, and let's do this together. So that's what motivated me to do that. Was I just wanted to connect with students and really give them encouragement, to tell them that they could do it. And it would give me a chance to learn the material, the teaching part. That was fun. I knew I was going to learn interest theory better, and so I could make Interest FM a better product for the customers by teaching it. Even though I knew it backwards and forwards, when you teach it, you learn it
Different.
Top to bottom. You learn another dimension to it. And so I thought this in the long run will be good for the product. But I thought it would be an opportunity for me to kind of give back. And so I took that, and I did learn a lot about FM, and like I thought, but I met people. And the success of my career is rarely about information. It's almost always about people.
Mm-hmm.
Like you and I, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're people. We know each other. And that's opened this door to this wonderful podcast that I knew nothing about. And so people is what's opened the door for success. And so I met Brooke, who was a professor there. Well, she was an adjunct professor, but her day job was working at the principal.
Mm.
And she was extremely generous. She had done this before. And so she gave me all of her practice problems, all of her content that she created. And she said, Dave, let's work together. And I said, great. And she said, I can just give you the stuff that I've done in the past. And it's like, wow, that was so generous.
Yeah.
And then the only thing we actually collaborated on new stuff was the new test that we were going to create from scratch. We worked on that together, but old stuff like homework, all that nitty gritty things, she just handed it to me and just gave it to me and said, you can use it. So I thought, wow, that just saved me so much time. And it was so much better than what I would have come with on my own. So, I met someone that really got me started on it. And then I started meeting the students, and one of the students I had was Terrence, and he was sitting in front of me, and he was head and shoulders above everyone else in the class and brilliant. And I learned that real quick. And I was able to offer him an internship position because I thought, I want that guy working for me.
Yeah.
And he's now VP of our products, reports to the president.
Yeah.
And so that was like 2010, maybe 2011. So 14 years ago, and he stuck with us through all the Wild West beginnings. He could have gone anywhere.
Yeah.
He was brilliant, but he stuck with me. And so, that's the blessing of God. But I think it comes from, stepping in and just serving, teaching, and good things happen.
Yes. Coaching actuaries, obviously a great culture. People like it. And you do have quite a wonderful legacy of interns. So I want to ask you about a specific intern, past intern. Tell me about Tong.
Okay, sure. So Tong was 1 year older than Terrence, and Terrence was a sophomore at that time. So Tong probably was a junior, maybe he was a senior, I don't know. But I actually hired his roommate, PJ. And PJ was a good pickup, and he was doing a good job for me. And I remember I would post the opportunities for working at Coach Actuaries at Drake, like on their billboard. Like, hey, if you're looking for an internship job, contact me. I don't know if I ever really got any responses to that, which surprised me because I thought they would be looking for internships. But networking was the way to get to people. And PJ was telling me, he's like, okay, this is a really a unique opportunity for education. And I've got a roommate who I think is like way better than fits me because he's really into actual education. He's teaching and he's helping, he's tutoring, he's doing all these things voluntarily at Drake. And he's kind of like a leader amongst the students. And students would go to him for answers. And I thought, well, that sounds like the guy. And so that guy was Tong. And so now Tong is our president.
Yeah.
And like Terrence and like so many others, he started with us when we were the Wild West, and had the patience to learn as we were building this together, and has done a remarkable job.
Yeah. Wow. What a crazy journey. Just like the success with consulting and the challenges before, the success when you were working in insurance and the challenge getting in, and then the success with coaching actuaries and like trying to 3 times to get there. And so now here you are. You've got a business. You've got a product that people love and are passionate about. But you are like a creative person. You have ambition. There's more. You always, are thinking about what's next. And so, how did you come up with this idea for Intersecting Us and this next venture you're on?
Well, I hired fantastic people, and sometimes when you hire fantastic people, you hire yourself out of a job.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened, long story short. And so I have all this energy of wanting to still, now I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking, I started just reading math stories because I'd never done that before. And I started reading books on the history of math. And so I learned the stories of how math developed, and that opened up so many ideas in my mind and so many thoughts. And it touched me in ways that nothing else had. And so I just wanted to explore that. And I had time to do it. And so I did that. And so then I wanted to share some of these ideas with others. And Intersecting Us was an opportunity for me to do a give back venture where I could share some of the things that I think are really cool about math to people in ways that they don't need to think about how to pass a test for. They can just enjoy it, and it doesn't have to be filtered by institutions or what it needs to know to pass exam. So I have no really limits as to what I can do. And so that is something that has driven a lot of energy and passion for me.
That's an interesting way to describe it, as like an unrestricted math education. There's no tests, there's no grades, there's no curriculum. We were talking last night, and you said something that really resonated with me. As actuaries, particularly in the applied math world, we think we're so smart, right? We learn all this mathematics that's all advanced. It's the culmination of all of humans' history's mathematics, and we just like pick it up. Dave hops on a video and tells you about it. You write it on a sheet of paper, and bam, you can solve these complex problems. But there's math geniuses today, but the people who derived and advanced it in the past and what they had to overcome to achieve it, I mean, it's a very different and humbling way to look at mathematics and appreciate it in a different way than, okay, I did my job, I solved a problem. But to look at it and understand the legacy of what that math means, I think it brings a certain level of fulfillment in life.
It is. And there's so many cool things about it, and it's hard for me to articulate in such a short period. But one idea that really sticks into my head is the diversity of these groups of people, is that they come from all backgrounds, all cultures. Most of them were underprivileged. Most of them were poor. And yet none of those things kept them from coming up with what I was able to discover is some of the best ideas known to the human race. And part of what makes them some of the best ideas is because their ideas built on the ideas before them. And so they're learning from others. So they're not starting from scratch. They're taking great ideas from the people before them, and then other people built on their ideas going forward. And so it's just this one big project of building a math cathedral. And these people were the ones that built parts of that cathedral that turned out to be fundamentally, critical to that other disciplines were built upon. And so it's not just that they learned some new math formula, they learned things that were fundamental for other things to be built on it. And so I started to see there's some parts of math that is really extra important, and trying to understand what those things are, and then learn about the people that did it. And a lot of those people didn't even realize it at the time that they were changing history, because math takes a long time to develop. And that has allowed me to be more patient, because most of the things I do don't turn into success right away. It's rare for that to occur. So patience is important. And so I'm reading about these people that discovered math, and sometimes it was even hundreds of years till their ideas became recognized as important. And so I think that if you believe what you're doing is important, don't let setbacks hold you back. Rather, try to find ways to improve upon it and trust that this is important.
I remember my first book club. We read a book on the history of math, and we learned about we talk about favorite mathematicians, and I think yours is Euler. Yeah, and we learned about Euclid and this kind of foundation of math. So for context, Alexander the Great goes out. He conquers this massive empire. He starts naming cities after himself. And really just by the nature of building the Alexandrian Empire, he connects all these disparate parts of the world and all these different information centers. And this guy in Euclid in Egypt starts collecting mathematical information from all over the world and compiles from 4 axioms?
5.
5 axioms. 5, if we just take these 5 things for granted, and proves the foundation for all of future mathematics. And he does it in such an elegant and fundamental way that, Abraham Lincoln would read Euclid thousands of years later to practice the proofs, the logic. And, it was the first time where I really appreciated, we hear these names attached to formulas and proofs, and just to see how monumental someone's life work can be and how unique it is. I mean, yeah, there's great mathematicians that prove so many things, but there are a few people who in their lifetime created and published things that just pivoted everything forever. And Euclid, you brought that to me for the first time ever in Euclid. It was such a powerful experience.
Yeah, that his textbook, The Elements, was the number 2 most popular book from that era, other than the Bible.
Yeah.
And so it's a math book.
It's a math
book. And on geometry. And one of the things I learned about it was that not everything came from Euclid. So not only was Euclid smart at what he did, but he was resourceful and, like you say, collecting things from other mathematicians. And I'm sure that was a difficult thing because they don't have like the internet, smartphones back then. And so how he actually got that information and compiled it and made sense of it would have been a wonderful, amazing thing to just like see how he did that, because it would have been so difficult to do it back in those days. And so it reminds me of how amazing these people are. They're super smart, but they were super resourceful, and they did things that we never think about now. Like, you don't think about people like Euclid as being like a collaborative person. And so we kind of get the idea that collaboration is almost like an American idea, that we just kind of came up with it. And you realize in math, that's been going on forever.
So that was our first book. We have several seasons now, and we're working on season 7. So tell me a bit about season 7.
Season 7 starts early March, and it's a book on topology, which a lot of actuaries don't know about topology, and that's okay. And the book starts out talking about how the greats missed it. So it says Euclid missed it. Archimedes missed it. Newton missed it. All these people that studied shapes and geometric ideas missed one of the most fundamental ideas about shapes that is extremely simple. And I'd never thought about that because, you may hear like, okay, topology was discovered by Euler in 1750. Okay, that's just a fact. But you don't think about like, why didn't other people discover that before them? So that was how he starts the book. And the formula he's referring to is a formula that all polyhedron. So if you think of a polygon, just like a 2-dimensional shape, and then you put it together and form like a 3-dimensional shape. So if you think of like a soccer ball made up of pentagons and hexagons, so that becomes a polyhedron because it's 3-dimensional. And he's saying that any of those 3-dimensional shapes that are built by a polyhedron follow this formula, that if you count the number of vertices and you add the number of sides and then you subtract the number of edges, that number is 2. And so you can get a soccer ball, take all those polygons and hexagons, do the math, it's going to be 2. And it doesn't matter what kind of polyhedron you work with. If you put all those together, it always is that. And so that's what they're saying, is that the greats missed it. An extremely simple formula, talking about very simple ideas. A grade school, like a junior high person could get this. And yet the greats missed it. And it's everywhere. I mean, it's for all of shapes that are in our universe that meet those criteria. And so it's just a nice novel story to see that even the greats miss things. And so they're very human as well.
Yeah. I think it's a nice point to come back to, to bring it full circle about you interviewing for your first job as an actuary, flipping through the pamphlet when you're walking through it and just thinking like how intimidating this math must be. And one of the great things about being in the roots seasons and reading the books is just like how accessible the math still is. And it doesn't take a lot of time. And if you're in a humble group of people who are just curious, you can pick up and learn these disparate advanced mathematical fields in a way that is very relatable. And the thing I think I love the most is just how much I feel it connects to our lives, how much we see it on a daily basis once it's recognized, these mathematical principles.
Right.
And, it's just, it's humbling.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I really like about the topology book, and I think you can relate to this a little bit, Charles, is that it focuses on what you do with shapes when you stretch it, when you tear it and you twist it. And it's looking for connectedness in shapes as you do those things. So it's looking at how things could be connected under certain actions. And the thing that is interesting about that is what's not included in that list is we're not measuring things. And that's what we think math is about.
Yeah.
Is like, okay, what's the angle? How can I calculate the area? How can I do all? And so I think what's happened is like we got so focused on calculating all these things because that's what math people do, that we missed that if you take out calculating stuff and remove that from the process, you could define a new type of math field by doing other types of actions.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really cool because, as actuaries, we sometimes being good at calculating stuff is a hindrance because we want to get that calculator out like right away. But how do you know you're calculating the right thing?
Yeah.
Are you asking the right questions? You in your mind, I know the answer, but are you asking the right question?
Yeah.
And I know you know what I'm talking about. And so it's the kind of like this idea that has gone through the history of math that we got our calculators out way too early in geometry because we want to take the sine of the angle and we want to do all this stuff. It's like, well, let's forget all that and let's now look at something different. And the creative part about it is like, okay, how can we just define what actions are important? So that's what Euler did. He says, I'm going to care about these things. I'm not going to care about measurement. I'm going to care about twisting. I'm going to care about this. It's like, what gives us the right to do that? Like, where is that written in the math world that we can do that? And the cool thing is that it's not, that we have the freedom to explore.
Yeah.
And that's what Euler did. He says, I'm going to just do this. And out of it came a whole subject of ideas called topology that at first seemed very academic and not important. And then now in our modern world, as we start looking at the universe, we start looking at the galaxies, and we start wondering, what is the shape of the universe? Big questions like, okay, is it like a sphere? Is it expanding? And, the experts are going into all that stuff. And they find that the answer to that question comes back to what Euler was discovering, is that you have to go to topology to answer that question. And of course, no one was thinking that when they're doing topology, that we're going to figure out what the shape of the universe is. So that's the beauty of math in a nutshell, is we explore things that we think probably aren't ever going to solve any problems. And then out of the blue, you find out that the universe is designed in that shape. That you just created out of your mind, out of thin air. It never exists. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, it actually exists, and it's the shape of the universe.
Yeah. One of my favorite books, we talked about this last night about, our passion projects. And so I love space. One of my favorite books is called How the Universe Got Its Spots. And the whole book is about, someone doing their PhD and thesis and research about how the topological structure of the universe would show up in the spots of the CMB in the study of it. And it's just beautiful to see the math and reality connect. So I want to bring it back full circle as we wrap it up here. So, Dave, young Dave, loving math, loving teaching math. You've built an empire of math education. You've done what I imagine is, far beyond ever the influence you would have. So, for all the people out there, all the coaching actuaries lovers, all the Dave Kester fans, what's a lasting message you want to leave for them?
Well, I think the human equation is the most important. And as I think about why I like reading about math, is that math is really about the good math, interesting math is about story. And that story is about people. And in that story, we learn so much. We learn some things that help us solve business problems, but we also learn so much about us as humans. And math is a universal language. It's something that we all know we can all speak. And it doesn't matter when you lived, where you lived, what your economic background is, we can all participate together. And at the end, truth wins. And that it doesn't, I could be the most influential person, but if I throw an idea that's not logical, money's not going to make that idea be part of math. And so it requires an even playing field because it all needs to be logical. But there's so much of the human experience that comes out of that that I think is missing in today's world when we think about math. And I want to kind of like just highlight the wonderful stories that math has for us to learn from, to experience, not just to learn the math better, but to learn more about who we are as a human race.
Mm, that's beautiful. Well, I want to thank Dave Kester for coming in and talking to me today, and the journey we took, the math journey we just took. I appreciate you bringing me on that, and I'm excited to read our next book.
Yeah, sounds good. And thank you, Charles, for setting this up.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.